Tonight, our Power Hour topic is feedback inside and outside of Toastmasters. Robyn Seaton, Showtime's VP of Education, has been in Toastmasters since 2010. Within Toastmasters and out in the real world, she has given and received much and varied feedback over the years. She has learned a lot about the process along the way. Robyn's career involved designing and implementing accounting and budgeting systems at all levels of government. She worked for software companies and as a systems policy analyst for the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. That meant that she gave and received a lot of feedback, and not all of it was pleasant. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Robyn Seaton with her discussion of feedback inside and outside of Toastmasters. She invites you to join her in this discussion and share your experiences. Robyn?
Thank you very much, Marilyn, for that wonderful introduction. That's that noise that you get when your audio system is not set up properly. And that's called feedback, which is the first thing you hear on the dictionary entries, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. We are talking about feedback and evaluations for life, if you will, both within Toastmasters and outside of Toastmasters, because everybody gets feedback in lots of different ways. You simply cannot escape it. It's all around us. So tonight I'm going to talk about feedback in general first, and then I want to get into a little bit about evaluations, which I consider to be a subset of feedback, if you will, because it's more formal and structured, but it's still a way to get information back on what you're doing or to give that to somebody else. So first, let's define, first, let's run a poll, which Bobby has, I think, to just level set and figure out where we are. So I'd like to find out about you as a Toastmaster and how much you've done in terms of evaluations, both inside and outside of Toastmasters. So Bobby, let us know.
Okay, there are 3 questions, so you might have to scroll down. And I don't think the host and co-host can do that.
That's true. So it'll be short.
Yeah.
Maybe
okay,
we won't bother.
We have our answers here, Robyn. I'll end the poll and share the results. Okay, so the first question. How many years have you been in Toastmasters? Looks like we're mostly old timers here.
That's what I figured.
Yeah. And the second one, how many times have you given a speech evaluation? Again, we're old timers here.
More than I can count. Right?
Yeah. And then do you give formal evaluations outside of Toastmasters? And sometimes, frequently, almost all the time.
Okay, good. So we've got a split, but hopefully everybody knows what they're doing when it comes to evaluations within Toastmasters anyway. So that's good. I don't have to go through that whole thing. You can find some other video somewhere about that if you want, certainly. So let's define feedback. You see it in several different ways in several different dictionaries, but to boil it down, I think it's a reaction or response to a particular process or activity. So in Toastmaster, as I said, there are formal evaluations that are part of the feedback, but there's also other types of feedback that you get in Toastmaster meetings. For example, people will give you comments on your speeches, in addition to what the official speech evaluator might do. Also, we get feedback from the timer. Are we within time or out of time, too short, too long, whatever. the accountant and grammarian, or linguist as we call it in Showtime, often has lots of useful feedback, hopefully useful. And this is an area where you might get a chance to practice how well you react to good feedback versus maybe not so good feedback. So that's a good example of it. The general evaluator also gives us feedback on how well the meeting has gone. And in Toastmasters, or in Showtime Toastmasters, I think this is probably unique for us because we're an online virtual club. We have a virtual evaluator who helps us figure out how are we looking in Zoom and how are we acting here. So as I said, lots of feedback happening within Toastmasters, even more happening outside of Toastmasters. And that can come in several different forms. For example, we can have verbal feedback, people talking to each other, or we can have nonverbal feedback. Some examples of verbal feedback include friends. For example, you might say, Bobby, did you like that movie? Or Marilyn, does this outfit look okay? I mean, so that's an example of asking for feedback and receiving it, hopefully. Other situations could be with your children. You might give them some feedback about what you want them to wear, for school that day. They are likely to give you feedback though, like, I don't want broccoli. I want a cookie instead. Or I don't want to go to bed. I want to watch TV. So that's probably feedback you may not want to hear either, but I'm sure you'll be giving them feedback in return for that. In addition, when you were growing up, I'm sure you got lots of feedback and thoughts from both parents, siblings, your teachers, lots of different ways and things that you get feedback along those lines, much of which is probably helpful, much of which is perhaps pretty annoying, if you will. So how do you learn to deal with that? Hopefully, in some cases, you have two-way feedback sessions. For example, with a doctor or a mentor that you might have. If you're going to the doctor and you're saying, my leg hurts, hopefully he's going to come back and ask you, well, tell me more about it. Let me know. And does it hurt if I do this, if I poke it or whatever? And you're going to go, ouch. So there's some semi-verbal feedback, I guess. And hopefully he will tell you something that you can do about it, whether it's medication, or you should go out and get more exercise, or clean up your diet, or whatever. Lots of things along there. So let me ask you to put in the chat now some other examples of verbal feedback that you might encounter and how you deal with it. Marilyn smiling. Karen says teasing. Yeah, that's the tough one. Bobby says someone flips you off if you accidentally cut them off in traffic. Yeah, that's good. And they'll probably yell at you, and you might yell back at them, give them some verbal feedback. They may not hear it, but at least it will feel good to give it back, if you will. Karen says, mostly teasing from classmates in school. Yeah, I know all about that, the whole bullying thing too, and when it gets really serious, certainly. And now for humor, that's always fun as well. Marilyn says she has a brother who has no problem letting anyone and everyone know what he thinks they should do. I always appreciate my absolute control when I don't yell at him. That's always a good idea to help keep family unity in place and avoid the yelling. Karen says, complimenting a stranger. Yes, that's always a good thing to do. It's amazing how much of a difference you can make in somebody's life when you compliment them. For example, I was at the grocery store earlier today, in fact, and the produce department there didn't have one of the things that I needed. And I know the produce manager there because I've dealt with him before. And that was one of the things I did was I complimented him on the great work that he does, because the produce department always looks wonderful there. They have great vegetables. And I needed Italian parsley for my rabbits today, and they didn't have any. So he told me in return that the truck is coming in around 4 o'clock today. So after I get out of this meeting, hopefully I can run up there and get some. So there's a compliment for you that helped in that case and gave me the feedback that I was hoping to get, which was, yeah, we don't have it in the back at this point, but I can get you some later today. Hopefully that will prevent some of the negative feedback from my rabbits later too. Let's see what else we have. Oh, Connie, feedback from my teammates and being on a church committee. Yes, committees are always places where you're going to exchange a lot of feedback, I would think, and ideas, hopefully, and suggestions. Absolutely. So, all right, great responses to that. I'll tell you a story about some verbal feedback that I was looking for at one point from my spouse, Doug. He would always bristle whenever we talked about going out to a restaurant, and sometimes I didn't really care that much where we went. So I would just say, you pick. I'm fine with whatever. And he just would get really upset with that sometimes. And I'd say, well, you know what I like. I'm not too concerned about it. But he would always get upset. And I couldn't figure it out. And so I just let it slide for a long time. And then finally, one day, I asked him for some feedback about what don't you like about the word whatever, because that seemed to be a big problem. It turns out that his mother used that as a way to manipulate people in the family, because she would say, oh, whatever you want, I'll go. And then she'd get there and say, no, this doesn't look good. No, I don't want that. No. So you'd end up feeling like a fool. And it was always based on that word, whatever. So after that, I tried very hard to avoid using that word because that was clearly a trigger for him. So that was feedback I was very glad to get. So now we can go out to restaurant without having to worry about that kind of thing in my saying, well, I said I wanted anything, but I really don't want this. So good job. Now, the other thing is after that, whenever I would ask him what I should make for dinner, for example, he almost invariably said something good. I was like, oh, good, thank you. That doesn't help. I was planning on making something bad. But sometimes you come up with a thought, and other times I would have to figure it out. So those are my stories. Nonverbal feedback. There are a lot of different ways to get that as well. For example, somebody smiling or frowning at you. Maybe giving you a side-eyed glance. Maybe turning away from you. Hopefully not hitting you, but with some people, that's what you get, I think. So there's a lot of different ways that we can really get our point across without having to say anything. On top of that, we can even get nonverbal feedback from other sources like our pets. Our dogs, for example, might bark, again, kind of verbal, but not in words, or wag their tail when you come home to tell you that they're happy to see you. So you're getting feedback from them. Cats might meow if they're hungry. They might try to tear up your sofa if they're not happy about something. They can just pull that cat, I'm huffy and you don't mean anything to me, move as well. So there are lots of ways that your dogs and cats can let you know, either out loud or in their attitudes, about what they think about what you are or are not doing. And I mentioned that I have rabbits already, and they really don't make very much noise at all. Maybe an occasional grunt or something, a little bit, but not much. But they definitely do know how to get my attention. Jackson, in particular, has developed the most intense stare that you can imagine. So if I'm in their pen and I'm not getting the treats out quick enough, maybe I'm cleaning out their litter pan or whatever, and I'll say, wait a minute, he'll just come over and start staring me in the face. And it's clear that, okay, I'd better get my act together and get him the dried papaya that he is expecting. And if that actually doesn't work, then he'll come along and actually bump me with his nose. Or if I try to pet him and he's not interested in being petted at that time, he'll push me away. If he is interested, then he'll just hunker down and put his head as far down as he can get so that I can pet him there as well. So he's got a lot of signs that I can read, that I can take as feedback about what he wants. So what about some of you? Some of you have pets or other examples of nonverbal feedback that you get? Why don't you unmute yourself and let us know?
I had a cat several years ago who was a very mellow cat. But I also had a rule about cats that I bathed them.
Ooh.
Well, I have friends who are allergic to the dander, and they got bathed from the time they were kittens, so it wasn't something that they weren't accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
But Trouble had this thing that it didn't matter how old he was or how long he'd been getting bathed, he didn't like them. And yet he had no problems letting me know. He would get up on the arm of the sofa with his fur all bedraggled and spiky. He would he would look at me, he would turn his back on me, and then he would sit there and start cleaning himself. It was absolutely hysterical to watch, but I had no doubts whatsoever of what he was telling me. So
absolutely. I can just picture that. In fact, pretty amazing. Amazing. Karen, what about you?
My cat Sheba, she gives me love nibbles.
Oh, that's good.
She's done it since the day I adopted her, and that's kind of why I fell in love. She just like nibbled my ear ever so sweetly, and she nibbled my foot ever so sweetly, and she does it to this day. And the other piece of body language that she gives me is at the end of my workday, because I work from home. She'll sit on the coffee table and stare me down and go, "Are you going to sit still so I can get on your lap and you can let me take a nap?" So she has a whole routine, and she does a lot of communicating when she's not meowing.
That's funny. That's funny. So she can tell time too, it sounds like.
Yep, she can tell time.
Yeah, mine are the same way.
Oh yeah,
It's amazing.
you can set your watch by him.
Indeed. And they must all have that stare thing down somehow. You know, it's yeah, pretty cool. Connie or Bobby, do you have any stories?
I've got a very humbling one with my dog, Max, which most of you know. He's
Oh, that's
called
right.
Max the Destroyer. One time when we were out walking and he had just did his business and I was picking it up, and I waited for him because he likes to, with his back hind legs, scratch the grass or the dirt or the rocks or whatever. And so I thought he was done. And he timed it just right. When I went to go pick it up, he started doing that to me. And so I got a face full of dirt. And he had that look like, gotcha. So he was communicating with me.
Ah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think sometimes it's probably easier to understand what animals are trying to tell you better than what people are.
I have a theory about that.
Yes.
I think people just by nature communicate better non-verbally because it's easier to understand in people's communications, especially if they're not really good communicators. Like somebody can be saying one thing and then you look at them and their body language totally is incongruous with what they're saying. And yeah, I've been told my body language speaks volumes, so I have to try to tone it down at times.
I just found that out too. We have a new policy going in effect that I totally disagree with. And my girlfriend, I thought I was, totally neutral. And she's like, don't play poker today, Connie, because you gave yourself away. And I'm like, what? And she goes, you could tell you were like, kind of like this with your mouth, and you even rolled your eyes a couple of times. I'm like, I don't think I ever rolled my eyes. And she's like, oh, you were rolling your eyes.
Busted.
Guilty.
Everybody rolls their eyes.
Yes.
Well, it's one of my pet peeves with my kids. So, I really was surprised when she said I rolled my eyes because I'm like, I don't like it.
No,
The eye roll is a classic.
and Robyn, when you were talking about nonverbal, one of my first thoughts was about email and, text type
Also true.
communications and how we use emojis sometimes to maybe change a little bit the sound, what people might perceive of our actual words, like a smiley face to show you're teasing as opposed to, being serious about some comment or whatever,
Mhm.
or a wink, winks are fun.
Yes, that's an excellent comment. Email and Facebook posts and Instagram posts and Twitters and tweets on Twitter, I should say, and all of those are definitely ways to communicate. And again, that's probably a very difficult way and often to get your point across because you don't have that context, right?
Yeah.
And the emoji that you think you're using in one way may not be taken the same way by whoever is reading it. So, excellent point, Bobby. Right. Bobby, while I'm talking to you, I've got a question for you. What do you usually think or do when you receive feedback from someone? How do you handle that, whether it's good or bad?
I guess it depends who it comes from first and like the context. So if I'm getting the evaluation at work, then first of all, I'm happy to get the evaluation because it was always a struggle within our department to make sure evals were done on time. And I would usually, so long as the feedback kind of matched my expectations, I didn't really have a problem, but if something comes out of left field, then I might have to, think about it. I might consider like, again, who said it and, the context of why they might be saying it. And if I totally disagree, but somebody else makes a similar comment, then I would force myself to reconsider that feedback, because there's probably some validity if more than one person feels the same way. And, if it's negative feedback, I guess I try not to take it personally, in the sense that, feedback is supposed to be about behavior, not about you as a person. So I try, and Don Miguel Ruiz in the 4 agreements, one of his 4 agreements for a better life is to not take things personally. So I try not to take it personally about me, but rather what someone's seeing or behavior that I've exhibited. So it depends.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, Bobby. And just to tag on with that, there was an article in the Toastmasters magazine that I saw from a positive psychologist who talked about focusing on the facts of an evaluation or of some feedback that you've got. Don't focus on the opinions that they're expressing, because that may only belong to that one person. But as you said, if you get that kind of feedback or that kind of thought from multiple people, then maybe you want to look at it a little more closely. But look at the facts and then see if those really do apply to you. And then figure out a plan for dealing with that in the future. So very good. Thank you, Bobby, for that. Well, you mentioned evaluations. Let's talk a little bit more about that now. A definition of an evaluation is a judgment or a determination of the worth, quality, significance, or condition of something. So, as I said, it's related to feedback. I would think it's actually a form of feedback that's a little more formal and often uses a form like a performance review or evaluation at work, as you were mentioning. So we all know about speech evaluations in Toastmasters, since we've all been around here for a long time, so I won't belabor those, certainly. But I will ask Marilyn, if I can, or anybody else who wants to chime in, about giving speech evaluations and how you come up with something that's a little more original or insightful. Marilyn, that's one of the things that I find you doing all the time, and I think we've talked about this before as well. What kinds of things are you looking for that go beyond the standard gestures, vocal variety, that kind of thing?
Well, and I appreciate the question, because especially since we're all representing Toastmasters in Showtime right now, with our having the B evaluations, I have learned so much being involved in Showtime about, shall we say, and well, I'll use the cliche and say taking it to the next level. But there are standards that when you first start out as a Toastmaster and you're first starting to evaluate, you are drilled, how was their vocal variety? Did they use good gestures? Did it match up? Was their flow good? It's kind of like, all right, so we know those. What I tend to look at when someone is giving a presentation is, are they passionate? Do they believe in what they're talking about? Or are they did they just pick a topic and they're just spitting it out there? Are their transitions good? Because I like something that flows well. And if I miss transitions myself, hey, call me on it. But because I really think that the flow of a presentation or a speech is incredibly important to keep your audience engaged. You can't jar them, you can't jolt them too much. So that's kind of what I look at, is how did they express their opinion? Did they Did they support that opinion? Did they give us enough examples? I like stories. Did they give me some stories? Did they make it a personal thing? So that's kind of what I look at the next level down, if you will. And thanks for asking.
Thank you for answering. As I said, I always love the evaluations that you give, because you do get into some unique things that are in many ways more actionable, I think, and will make you a much better speaker, as opposed to just some of the mechanical things that are out there, which are certainly important, but it's not all that you want to be looking at. Anyone else on that? Otherwise, let's go on and talk about outside of Toastmasters. What kinds of evaluations do you get out there? Probably the most common one, I would think, would be your performance review at work. And those are probably also the ones that are the most emotional, if you will, or scary, perhaps. Some people might look forward to them, but I don't think that happens a lot. But I think there are ways that you can deal with that, or maybe make it a little better. For example, use your Toastmasters skills. We've all had to do persuasive speeches, right? Lay out the facts, convince people that you deserve that raise or that promotion. So be a persuasive speaker. Bring out your table topic skills if they come back and ask you a question. This is probably even more important if you're going for a job interview too, because who knows what kind of question they might come up with. So that's an advantage for sure that we Toastmasters have, I think, in those kinds of areas. So let's make sure that we use those to full advantage. We have another poll about how you feel about giving and receiving evaluations outside of Toastmasters. If you want to put that up, Bobby. Again, I guess there's only 3 of us responding. So maybe what I'll say is I'll just read what the options are. So it depends, probably pretty common. I hate it. I get nervous about it. I'm kind of neutral. I like it, or even I might love it. So it could be probably any of those for giving, and the same for receiving evaluations. For example, it could be not applicable because you don't get them for whatever reason. Maybe you're working on your own and you're doing self-evaluations. A lot of them can be a real waste of time. Your boss just wants to talk about himself, or what the company is trying to do, but not telling you anything that you could do to make things better. You could feel attacked. There's some pretty toxic bosses out there, certainly. Misunderstood, confused, helped. A lot of different ways that you can come out of a performance review for that. So let's pass on the poll since we got that, and since it's a small group. How about, yeah, we'll close that. I didn't even respond, and then I just talked instead. So let's see, how do you feel about it? We've got a few minutes before I should wrap this up and go into Q&A. Anybody have any tips on how to get through a performance evaluation? Connie?
This isn't a performance evaluation. What I have to evaluate a lot of times is the training that's offered. I work for Karen who doesn't know, I work for a university. And we always have constant trainings on updated things that are happening to our catalog and our new programs. So I have to evaluate the trainings, or if we have a new application or a new development in Salesforce, then there's always sending out surveys, and this stays here, but I get very aggravated with the Salesforce because I give my opinion and I want to help change things, but things never change. And then I just felt like waste of time. So it really depends on what I'm being asked to evaluate. When you say for the 10th time we need to change XYZ, something as simple as putting the United States as, because most of my students are from the United States, as the first selection instead of having a list of 125 countries and it's at the bottom.
I hate that.
you know
Oh, at least.
Yeah, and I think Connie has a really, really good point is more and more, and I'm not even working anymore. So this is really telling me. I despise a survey that will ask you, how can, my bank does this all the time. How can we improve? You're not going to listen to me anyway. Why would I answer you? And if someone responds with something in the how can we improve category, why do you not have someone designated to reach out to them and say, give me an example of why you think that needs improving, or, whatever, some kind of interaction? Because if you're going to ask somebody something like that, you had better be ready to let them know that you're serious about wanting their response.
mm-hmm.
Annoying surveys are so annoying. Anyway, I will stop now.
No,
So just today, I filled out a survey for the company that provides the 457 plan. And I was a little annoyed because they had several questions that asked how satisfied you were. And they had 5 options, but they were like not satisfied at all, somewhat satisfied. And then it jumped from somewhat satisfied up to very satisfied and then extremely satisfied. So they didn't have an option for just plain neutral satisfied. And I found that annoying. So I ended up saying somewhat satisfied rather than very satisfied.
Oh, see, I would have said not satisfied at all, just on the basis of that question.
So I guess, when we're talking about surveys, giving feedback in surveys, I mean, we've all probably had to construct a survey ourselves at some point. And when we do, I think it's important that we remember to be appropriate in the response options that we give people,
Yeah, one of the things that always bothers me about surveys is when they don't have a place where you can put a comment, that all you're stuck with is numbers 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I may not want to put a comment, so don't force me to do that, but at least give me the opportunity.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, the responses aren't exactly right, or you really want to hit somebody over the head with it. Why are you doing this incredibly stupid thing?
Yeah.
And here's what you should do instead, maybe. Now, they may or may not listen to it or do anything about it, as Marilyn said here, but at least there's sometimes a certain satisfaction about being able to vent, if you will.
And like Marilyn said, if you're going to ask a question, be prepared to really want the answer.
Or take action on it,
Or
right?
take action on it. Yeah, that's.
Don't do it just to get a pulse on what people think if you're not going to do anything about it or share the results.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that.
And within Toastmasters, something that occurs to me is especially when we have a new member who's doing their icebreaker, and most clubs will make an effort to assign an experienced evaluator to that new member so that they get some kind of, kind,
constructive,
sensitive but constructive feedback for that new member. Because in my original home club some years ago, we had a new member who happened to be a pretty good friend of mine. And she told me that after her first speech, she almost didn't come back just because the feedback was so harsh, or at least she perceived it as being harsh. So we do have to be careful and sensitive, really, to the feelings of people when we give feedback.
Yes, I think that's very important. That's one of the things that we try to say in my home club as well, because we have a variety of people from brand new to, triple DTMs or whatever. Is really think about the person who's giving a speech or whatever and where they're coming from. Don't just dump on a new person, for example. They can't possibly take all of that in. And you're right, and it could very well come out being harsh sounding.
Well, and I
Those
find
of
that the
us-
people who are harsh, especially on an icebreaker, are more interested in hearing their own voice than in doing any good for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
sad but true.
This also makes me think about Trish in our Showtime Club, because a lot of times we are doing evaluations of competitive speakers and they're asking for higher level feedback, basically. But Trish, she often starts off the evaluation by asking, may I have your permission to give you, a higher level of feedback? And I think that's probably a good way to do it too, especially if you don't know the person well who you're evaluating.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard some people say, what level of evaluation do you want me to give you? A 1, 2, or 3, 1 being, here's just, the basics, and I'll, they won't tell you, they'll make it fuzzy sounding, but a little easier on them, all the way up to number 3, which is let me have it. I don't even care that much about any of the good stuff. Tell me what I need to improve, because you only have so much time to give your evaluation. So that is a very good way to do it, especially if you don't know where somebody is coming from, and if you have a wide variety of people. And even the same person might want to say, go easy on me for this one, because it's not necessarily that important. But if you're going to be going forward in a contest, then yeah, you probably want to have as much very specific feedback as you can get. I was watching interviews with the world champion of public speaking this year at the convention, and the guy who came in first said that he had gotten feedback and changed his speech 140 times while going through that process, and had taken speaking slots up in every club he could find, and was very grateful that his club allowed him to do that. And the guy who came in second place said that he probably had changed his 100 times as well. So that's a lot of feedback to be getting, but they made it to the world championship. So I guess it was worth it. Certainly. For performance evaluations, I've got a couple of tips I want to share as well for it. One thing that I've seen a lot of my coworkers do is basically nothing for a performance review. They don't even want to think about it. It's just, I'll go in and my manager will tell me whatever, and I may or may not care about it. I don't know, but they're not willing to do much for it. And I think that's a big mistake. That's one of the things that I always tried to do, was to keep track of all of my accomplishments during the year, of what I did, especially if your boss is in another state or another country and may not know what you're doing. So have that all set up. Think about what you want to say and what the messages are for your boss. Turn that into more of a two-way conversation. And again, use your Toastmasters skills for persuasive speaking, and come right out in some cases and say, I deserve this raise or this promotion or this bonus for these reasons. And I've actually managed to get that to work a couple of times, it seems. So yeah, don't be afraid to go into it. Take the reins for sure. And we're coming up a little after 7:15. So let me summarize some of this at least, and then maybe we can get into a broader discussion. That I want to say and think that both feedback and evaluations in particular are just a fact of life. You can't escape it. It's around you all the time. You're going to run into it every day, except maybe when you're hiding out at home by yourself during the pandemic or something. But in that case, there's still probably some forms of feedback you'll get. I found myself talking to myself more when I've been at home. So I guess I'm getting feedback from myself or going crazy, one or the other or both. So given that, I would say embrace the feedback that you get, what might seem negative or what might seem positive, look at the facts and keep a growth mindset. See what you can get out of that you can take and improve. You don't have to accept everything. In fact, you probably don't want to accept everything, but take what's important, pick out those nuggets, if you will, and make your life better as a result. And when you're giving feedback, I would encourage you to provide actionable and sincere feedback and evaluations so that people can take that in order to improve their own lives. So that's my take on feedback and evaluations. What other thoughts do you have?
I think when you use the word actionable, I think that probably includes being specific, but I think
Yes.
that's important to be really specific on what it is so that the person can take action.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things that we talk about in Toastmasters, I know a lot, is give me things that I can do to improve my speech specifically. What are the things that I can build on? Here are the things you can do. And you often don't get that from other people outside of Toastmasters. How many performance reviews have you gone to where they just say, you're not doing a good job at this. You're not taking care of the customers. Well, okay, but what exactly does that mean? What are the issues? What do you think I could do that might be better? What kinds of problems do you see happening? Those are some of those kinds of questions you want to be able to ask and drill down on that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Why do you think that's an issue? Just keep asking those why questions.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I had a vice president that really was very strongly into mentoring those who were not his direct reports, the peons down at my level. But he was truly invested in the people that worked in his department. And he actually created a form for us to do exactly what you were just talking about. Track what you have been doing so that when you go in, you've got dates, tasks. What did you volunteer for? What did you do outside of the job? Like, I helped actually organize a Toastmasters club at PayPal. Hello. So, it was that kind of a thing that was on this form. And even if you don't have a form, you got a phone, put it in your phone. You got something where you can literally keep track of what you feel were your accomplishments. And that way you can have a discussion with your manager or whomever that will involve, is this something that's worth consideration? If not, what would be? And what should I be tracking to keep, and also in Toastmasters, when we get evaluations on speeches, do you see a pattern in what they're telling you? I always see a pattern, but do you see a pattern in what the different evaluators are telling you? So all of these things are trackable and actionable. And it's something that's very important. Like I just used "and" 14 times. There you go, filler words. So, but that's actually something that I would always suggest, no matter what it is. If you're getting feedback on something, track it and see if you're improving over time. So there you go.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'd like to share something real quick too. So when I was home just recently in Wisconsin, one of my brothers and I got into a little tiff, right? And he said something where he said basically, you always blah, 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 blah. And that to me is not effective in giving feedback. The words always and never really do no good because they're absolutes. And again, it's more important to be specific and clear on what it is you're talking about and give an example, let's say, rather than just saying you always do this. Give me an example.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you hear always or never,
It's a cop out.
down.
Yeah.
You won't even hear the rest of the sentence.
And I will say we resolved our minor, difference, but
Well, that's good. That's good.
yeah.
Always good for siblings to get along.
But I'm not around him very much, so I was a little taken back. I'm not used to hearing you always blah, blah, blah.
Wow, especially to somebody you don't see that often.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, see, Rick and I see each other way too much lately. Yeah, I've learned when I go like, okay, I'll talk to you later.
So, okay, I have a question for the group here too. A lot of times when you're evaluating someone who's a really good, polished speaker, and you're the evaluator, someone years and years ago told me that if you can't think of anything to say to suggest to improve, just tell the person to continue doing what they're doing.
That's what I do.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
But see, there's no such thing as perfect.
And I agree.
Okay,
But
maybe that's what I do, Robyn. Maybe I listen to him knowing that no matter how good it sounds, that nothing is perfect. You know?
so then how do you find that thing? Do you
Well,
have like
okay.
a mental checklist that you go through and
No, Trish and Nancy are obviously my two biggest challenges because they are the two most polished, most experienced Toastmasters that I usually ever have the opportunity to evaluate. And so I literally have to look at them and say, at which point in time did something in the back of my head tweak? Because if they say something or they look not wrong, but just not right, or if a gesture didn't quite match, then I don't know, I have a little thing in the back of my head and it tweets. And I go like, okay, that's it right there, because I truly, no matter how much I know that I'm going to enjoy somebody's presentation, and I mean, and you're another one, you can be tough to evaluate. I'm always going to enjoy it and it's never going to be perfect. So there's always something that I may be the only one who sees it that can help them be aware of something that doesn't sit quite right. So yeah, that's it. But you're right, some of them are tough.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what about examples? Like just recently I was chatting with Robyn, and one of the most interesting pieces of feedback I heard Robyn give recently was when Tony did a speech and he used the acronym PAIN, P-A-I-N, and Robyn's feedback was to make sure that each of the words, the P word, the A word, the I word, the N word, that they were all verbs basically. And Robyn pointed out that that's parallelism.
Yes.
So it's a grammarian type thing. So what other kinds of examples do you guys have where someone's given feedback that you don't normally hear for a speech? That's the kind of feedback I really love to hear in a Toastmasters meeting.
Yeah. and that's a really good question, Bobby. I'd have to think about that. And I just heard Nancy give 2 evaluations. So I mean, you know, it seems like there'd be something there.
Yeah.
But
and recently it seems like a lot of what we're doing and the feedback we're getting in Toastmasters now has to do with story and constructing stories and, characters and the arc of a story, it's those kinds of things. So I've been kind of self-researching some of that so that I can be a little sharper on it. And in our club in Showtime, Tony is the master of telling stories, and he's got it's almost a formula in his case. So he always says,
I
start
think
off.
it is.
Yeah, well, and for example, one of the things he always suggests is to start off in the action. Put us in the middle of where, however you're starting your story, using action words and stuff like that. So that's the kind of feedback I really love to hear in Toastmasters, I should say.
Yeah, but see, things like that too, I'm always hesitant because maybe I'm too aware of trends or things that are trending. Stories are critical. I really believe that to be taken seriously in whatever your presentation is about, you need to have something that makes it personal. So if you tell 3 stories, at least one of them should be about you, that kind of a thing. But stories aren't required. It goes with whatever your topic is. Some topics stories don't work with. You still want some kind of a triplet because that's just sort of pleasing to humans do this thing, but we like triplets, but not all of them. I've heard speeches that did not have a story in it, and they were phenomenal speeches, but they were not stories. There were no stories in them. There might be examples, but there were no stories. So I think we have to be very careful that our premise matches our purpose. Sorry, I'm having to stop a timer. I apologize.
What do you mean by triplets?
A triplet is, okay, if I'm going to give, and just as by happen chance, next Monday I am giving, if I'm giving a speech about how people can impact other people, then I'm going to give 3 examples of how someone impacted someone else. One might be me impacting somebody, or somebody impacting me, or friends I watched, on the 3rd-party basis, but it's going to be 3 stories because that's a balance that for whatever reason, and I am no psychologist, but it works every single time. So that's a triplet.
And I've heard it said that our brains are hardwired to absorb better when we hear things in 3s, or we hear something 3 times, then it's easier to remember. It's more effective.
Okay, that makes sense, actually.
And
3 times a charm.
I've also heard it called the rule of 3 in terms of writing. So
yes. God help me, yes.
Yeah, that's another example of feedback that you don't hear all the time. It's beyond the vocal variety and the gestures and all that.
And that's even with that theory of feng shui, that you group pictures in 3s or 5. There's an odd number because it causes our brain attracts our brain on how you arrange.
A room has 3 points that balance, and absolutely, that's true.
Well, and then think about a joke. There's always, the first thing, the second thing, the third thing, the punchline.
And stories, 3 acts. There's 3 acts to a play. 3, So, oh God, we're hardwired.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I know, I've heard that, but yeah, it's even bigger than.
Yeah, it goes everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and they say even when you're constructing a speech to have point 1, point 2, point 3 and support each point. You know, you're open, point 1, point 2, point 3, and you're closed.
Yep.
One of the other unusual things that I've heard Trish say a few times is make sure that your title matches your speech. Because a lot of times they really don't seem to. It's something totally different. And it shouldn't be too obvious either.
Yeah, don't give it away. Yeah.
You wanna have it
Well, it's
be
because most people
interesting.
will create their title before they create their speech. And they try and cram the speech into fitting the title backwards.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know what your title is until you finished your speech.
Yeah, I looked for an intriguing title as well. And then another thing that Trish introduced to me personally and all of us, I think years ago, was the concept of having a foundational phrase in your speech that, you know, it's sort of the undercurrent. It's the thing that it's basically the summary of your speech in 10 words or less that you
I was
repeat
thinking that was
during your
the
speech.
chain.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Well, it looks like we've gone over time, actually. a little bit.
Oh,
Oh, we have. Okay, I'll go ahead and, is there anything we want to say before we close here, Marilyn?
I think I will just take a moment if it's okay. Karen, I want to thank you very much for attending tonight and for supporting Showtime in its efforts to be able to bring information and educate on different topics. So we are so delighted that you came.
This has been fun. It's my second one.
Oh, good. Well, I'd like to invite you to actually visit us at one of our club meetings.
I would love to. That was going to be my question. Are you
Second
guys
and
all
fourth
in
Monday.
Showtime?
Yes, second and fourth Monday. And we
What
meet
time?
at 6:30. And if you go to Showtime Showtime.toastmastersclub.org, you can go to our workshop or our agenda and register. We have a
Okay.
registration page and you just register with Zoom and it'll get you the reminder to you. So we'd love to have you visit.
I would love to watch your club because I'm in a corporate club and we don't get out much.
I know, I was in one too. Now, I do want to remind also our next Power Hour is on October the 17th. And as we have referred to Trish so often, you'll be pleased to know that Trish Blackwelder, who is a DTM as well as a past district governor, will be taking us through a topic on avoiding the blank page syndrome. So it should be very, very interesting. That is also obviously 6:30 and it will be on the 17th, as I said, in October.
Okay, it's my mom's birthday.
Oh,
Okay, it's before time change, so we're still Mountain Standard Time. You know?
My mom turns 81.
Oh, okay. Well,
Ooh,
then you may
nice.
not be able to make that one, and we will totally understand. But
I'll make it.
yeah, but check out the website for our meeting times.
Okay.
And thanks again so much for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it, and I hope
My
you have a
pleasure.
safe rest of your week.
Thank you.
And
You too.
let's
right.
also thank Robyn before we close tonight. So good job on the
Absolutely.
presentation.
Robyn, thank you so much. It was fun.
We'll
Yes,
go
it
ahead and
was.
Appreciate
stop
that.
the recording, okay?
I'll get the real feedback afterwards.